Chapter 1 of Babbitt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Vendetti, MikeVendetti.com. Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis. Chapter 1. 1. The towers of Zenith aspired above the morning mist, austere towers of steel and cement and limestone, sturdy as cliffs and delicate as silver rods. They were neither citadels nor churches, but frankly and beautifully office buildings. The mist took pity on the fretted structures of the earlier generations. The post-office with its shingled, tortured mansard, the red-brick minarets of hulking old houses, factories with stingy and sooted windows, wooden tenements colored like mud. The city was full of such grotesqueries. But the clean towers were thrusting them from the business center, and on the further hills were shining new houses, homes, they seemed, for laughter and tranquillity. Over a concrete bridge fled a limousine of long, sleek hood and noiseless engine. These people in evening clothes were returning from an all-night rehearsal of a little theater play, an artistic adventure, considerably illuminated by champagne. Below the bridge curved a railroad, a maze of green and crimson lights. The New York Flyer boomed past, and 20 lines of polished steel leaped into the glare. In one of the skyscrapers the wires of the Associated Press were closing down. The telegraph operators wearily raised their celluloid eye shades after a night of talking with Paris and Peking. Through the building crawled the scrub women, yawning, their old shoes slapping. The dawn mist spun away. Queues of men with lunch boxes clumped toward the immensity of new factories, sheets of glass and hollow tile, glittering shops where 5,000 men worked beneath one roof, pouring out the honest wares that would be sold up the Euphrates and across the veldt. The whistles rolled out in greeting, a chorus, cheerful as the April dawn, the song of labor in a city built, it seemed, for giants. 2. There was nothing of the giant in the aspect of the man who was beginning to awaken on the sleeping porch of a Dutch colonial house in the residential district of Zenith, known as Floral Heights. His name was George F. Babbitt. He was 46 years old now, in April 1920, and he made nothing in particular, neither butter nor shoes nor poetry. But he was nimble in the calling of selling houses for more than people could afford to pay. His large head was pink, his brown hair thin and dry. His face was babyish in slumber, despite his wrinkles and the red spectacle dents on the slopes of his nose. He was not fat, but he was exceedingly well fed. His cheeks were pads, and the unroughened hand which lay helpless on the khaki-colored blanket was slightly puffy. He seemed prosperous, extremely married, and unromantic. And altogether unromantic appeared this sleeping porch, which looked on one sizable elm, 2 respectable grass plots, a cement driveway, and a corrugated iron garage. Yet Babbitt was again dreaming of the fairy child, a dream more romantic than scarlet pagodas by a silver sea. For years the fairy child had come to him, where others saw but Georgie Babbitt. She discerned gallant youth. She waited for him in the darkness beyond mysterious groves. When at last he could slip away from the crowded house, he darted to her. His wife, his clamoring friends, sought to follow, but he escaped. The girl fleet beside him, and they crouched together on a shadowy hillside. She was so slim, so white, so eager. She cried that he was gay and valiant, that she would wait for him, that they would sail. Rumble and bang in the milk truck. Babbitt moaned, turned over, struggled back toward his dream. He could see only her face now, beyond misty waters. Furnace man slammed the basement door. Dog barked in the next yard. As Babbitt sank blissfully into a dim, warm tide, the paper carrier went by whistling, and the rolled-up advocate thumped the front door. Babbitt roused, his stomach constricted with alarm. As he relaxed, he was pierced by the familiar and irritating rattle of some one cranking a Ford. Snappa! 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 Himself a pious motorist, Babbitt cranked with the unseen driver. With him waited through taut hours for the roar of the starting engine. With him agonized as the roar ceased and again began, the infernal patient snap-a, a round, flat sound, a shivering, cold morning sound, a sound infuriating and inescapable. Not till the rising voice of the motor told him that the Ford was moving was he released from the panting tension. He glanced once at his favorite tree, elm twigs against the gold patina of sky, and fumbled for sleep as a drug. He, who had been a boy very credulous of life, was no longer greatly interested in the possible and improbable adventures of each new day. He escaped from reality till the alarm clock rang at 7:20. 3. It was the best of nationally advertised and quantitatively produced alarm clocks, with all modern attachments, including cathedral chime, intermittent alarm, and phosphorescent dial. Babbitt was proud of being awakened by such a rich device. Socially it was almost as creditable as buying expensive cord tires. He sulkily admitted now that there was no more escape, but he lay and detested the grind of the real estate business, and disliked his family and disliked himself for disliking them. The evening before he had played poker at Vergil Gunch's till midnight, and after such holidays he was irritable before breakfast. It may have been the tremendous home-brewed beer of the Prohibition era, and the cigars to which that beer enticed him. It may have been resentment of return from this fine, bold man-world to a restricted region of wives and stenographers, and of suggestions not to smoke so much. From the bedroom beside the sleeping porch, his wife's detestably cheerful, "Time to get up, Georgie boy," and the itchy sound, the brisk and scratchy sound of combing hairs out of a stiff brush. He grunted. He dragged his thick legs, in faded baby-blue pajamas, from under the khaki blanket. He sat on the edge of the cot, running his fingers through his wild hair, while his plump feet mechanically felt for his slippers. He looked regretfully at the blanket, forever a suggestion to him of freedom and heroism. He'd bought it for a camping trip which had never come off. Symbolized gorgeous loafing, gorgeous cursing, virile flannel shirts. He creaked to his feet, groaning at the waves of pain which passed behind his eyeballs. Though he waited for their scorching recurrence, he looked blurrily out at the yard. It delighted him, as always. It was the neat yard of a successful business man of Zenith. That is, it was perfection. It made him also perfect. He regarded the corrugated iron garage. For the 365th time in a year he reflected, "No class to that tin shack. Have to build me a frame garage. But by golly, it's the only thing on the place that isn't up to date." While he stared, he thought of a community garage for his acreage development, Glen Oriole. He stopped, puffing and jiggling. His arms were akimbo. His petulant, sleep-swollen face was set in harder lines. He suddenly seemed capable, an official, a man to contrive, to direct, to get things done. On the vigor of his idea he was carried down the hard, clean, unused-looking hall into the bathroom. Though the house was not large, it had, like all houses on Floral Heights, an altogether royal bathroom of porcelain and glazed tile and metal sleek as silver. The towel rack was a rod of clear glass set in nickel. The tub was long enough for a Prussian guard, and above the bowl was a sensational exhibit of toothbrush holder, shaving brush holder, soap dish, sponge dish, and medicine cabinet, so glittering and so ingenious that they resembled an electrical instrument board. But the Babbitt, whose god was modern appliances, was not pleased. The air of the bathroom was thick with the smell of a heathen toothpaste. "Verona been at it again. 'Stead of sticking to Libidol, like I've repeatedly asked her. She's gone and gotten some confound stinkum stuff that makes you sick." The bath mat was wrinkled and the floor mat was wet. His daughter, Verona, eccentrically took baths in the morning, now and then. He slipped on the mat and slid against the tub. Said, "Damn!" Furiously he snapped up his tube of shaving cream. Furiously he lathered, with a belligerent slapping of the uncourteous brush. Furiously he raked his plump cheeks with a safety razor. It pulled. The blade was dull. He said, "Damn! Oh, damn it!" He hunted through the medicine cabinet for a packet of new razor blades, reflecting, as invariably, be cheaper to buy one of those dinguses and strop your own blades. And when he discovered the packet behind the round box of bicarbonate of soda, he thought ill of his wife for putting it there and very well of himself for not saying "damn." But he did say it immediately afterward, when with wet and soap-slippery fingers he tried to remove the horrible little envelope and crisp clinging oiled paper from the new blade. Then there was the problem, oft pondered, never solved, of what to do with the old blade, which might imperil the fingers of his young. As usual, he tossed it on top of the medicine cabinet, with a mental note that some day he must remove the 50 or 60 other blades that were also temporarily piled up there. He finished his shaving in a growling testiness increased by a spinning headache and by the emptiness in his stomach. When he was done, his round face smooth and steamy and his eyes stinging from soapy water, he reached for a towel. The family towels were wet and clammy and vile, all of them wet. He found, as he blindly snatched them, his own face towel, his wife's, Verona's, Ted's, Tinka's, and the lone bath towel with a huge welt of initial. Then George F. Babbitt did a dismaying thing. He wiped his face on the guest towel. It was a pansy embroidered trifle which always hung there to indicate that the Babbitts were in the best of Floral Heights society. No one had ever used it. No guest had even dared to. Guest secretively took a corner of the nearest regular towel. He was raging. By golly, here they go and use up all the towels, every doggone one of 'em, and they use 'em and get 'em all wet and sopping and never put out a dry one for me, of course. I'm the goat. And then I want one, and I'm the only person in the doggone house that's got the slightest doggone bit of consideration for other people and thoughtfulness, and consider there may be others that may want to use the doggone bathroom after me, and consider—" He was pitching the chill abominations into the bathtub, pleased by the vindictiveness of the desolate flopping sound. And in the midst his wife serenely trotted in, observed serenely, "Why, Georgie dear, what are you doing? Are you going to wash out the towels? Why, you needn't wash out the towels. Oh, Georgie, didn't go and use the guest towel, did you?" It is not recorded that he was able to answer. For the first time in weeks he was sufficiently roused by his wife to look at her. 4. Myra Babbitt, Mrs. George F. Babbitt, was definitely mature. She had creases from the corner of her mouth to the bottom of her chin, and her plump neck bagged. But the thing that marked her as having passed the line was that she no longer had reticences before her husband, and no longer worried about not having reticences. She was in a petticoat now, in corsets which bulged, and unaware of being seen in bulgy corsets. She had become so dully habituated to married life that in her full matronliness she was as sexless as an anemic nun. She was a good woman, a kind woman, a diligent woman, but no one, save perhaps Tinka, her 10-year-old, was at all interested in her or entirely aware that she was alive. After a rather thorough discussion of all the domestic and social aspects of towels, she apologized to Babbitt for his having an alcoholic headache, and he recovered enough to endure the search for a BVD undershirt, which had, he pointed out malevolently, been concealed among his clean pajamas. He was fairly amiable in the conference on his brown suit. "What do you think, Maya?" He pawed at the clothes hunched on a chair in the bedroom, while she moved about mysteriously adjusting and patting her petticoat and to his jaundiced eye never seeming to get on with her dressing. "How about it? Shall I wear the brown suit another day?" "Well, it looks awfully nice on you." "I know, but gosh, it needs pressing." "That's so. Perhaps it does." "It certainly could stand being pressed, all right." "Yes, perhaps it wouldn't hurt it to be pressed." "But gee, the coat doesn't need pressing. No sense of having the whole darn suit pressed when the coat doesn't need it." "That's so."
"But the pants certainly need it, all right. Look at them. Look at those wrinkles. The pants certainly do need pressing."
"That's so. Oh, Georgie, why couldn't you wear the brown coat with the blue trousers? We were wondering what we'd do with them."
"Good Lord, did you ever in all my life know me to wear the coat of one of suit and the pants of another? What do you think I am, a busted bookkeeper?"
"Well, why don't you put on the dark gray suit today and stop in at the tailor and leave the brown trousers?"
"Well, they certainly need. Now where the devil is that gray suit? Oh, yes, here we are."
He was able to get through the other crisis of dressing with comparative resoluteness and calm. His first adornment was the sleeveless dimity BVD undershirt, in which he resembled a small boy humorously wearing a cheesecloth tabard at a civic pageant. He never put on BVDs without thanking the god of progress that he didn't wear tight, long, old-fashioned undergarments like his father-in-law and partner, Henry Thompson. His second embellishment was combing and slicking back his hair. It gave him a tremendous forehead, arching up 2 inches beyond the former hairline. But most wonder-working of all was the donning of his spectacles. There is character in spectacles, the pretentious tortoise-shell, the meek pince-nez of the school-teacher, the twisted silver-framed glasses of the old villager. Babbitt spectacles had huge, circular, frameless lenses of the very best glass. The earpieces were thin bars of gold. In them he was the modern business man, one who gave orders to clerks and drove a car and played occasional golf and was scholarly in regard to salesmanship. His head suddenly appeared not babyish but weighty, and you noted his heavy blunt nose, his straight mouth and thick, long upper lip, his chin over-fleshy but strong. With respect you beheld him put on the rest of his uniform as a solid citizen. The gray suit was well cut, well made, and completely undistinguished. It was a standard suit. White piping on the V of the vest added a flavor of law and learning. His shoes were black laced boots, good boots, honest boots, standard boots, extraordinarily uninteresting boots. The only frivolity was his purple knitted scarf. With considerable comment on the matter to Mrs. Babbitt, who, acrobatically fastening the back of her blouse to her skirt with a safety pin, did not hear a word he said. He chose between the purple scarf and a tapestry effect with stringless brown harps among brown palms, and into it he thrust a snakehead pin with opal eyes. A sensational event was changing from the brown suit to the gray the contents of his pockets. He was earnest about these objects. They were of internal importance, like baseball or the Republican Party. They included a fountain pen and a silver pencil, always lacking a supply of new leads, which belonged in the right-hand upper vest pocket. Without them he would have felt naked. On his watch-chain were a gold penknife, silver cigar-cutter, 7 keys, the use of 2 of which he had forgotten, and, incidentally, a good watch. Depending from the chain was a large yellowish elk's tooth, proclamation of his membership in the Benevolent and Protective Order of Elks. Most significant of all was his loose-leaf pocket notebook, that modern and efficient notebook which contained the addresses of people whom he had forgotten, prudent memorabilia of postal money orders which had reached their destinations months ago, stamps which had lost their mucilage, clippings of verses by T. Chamberlain Frink, and of newspaper editorials from which Babbitt got his opinions and his polysyllables, notes to be sure and do things which he did not intend to do, and one curious inscription, DSSDMYPDF. But he had no cigarette case. No one had ever happened to give him one, so he hadn't the habit, and people who carried cigarette cases he considered effeminate. Last, he stuck in his lapel the Boosters' Club button. With the consciousness of great art the button displayed two words: Boosters, Pep. It made Babbitt feel loyal and important. It associated him with good fellows, with men who were nice and human and important in business circles. It was his V.C., his Legion of Honor ribbon, his Phi Beta Kappa key. With the subtleties of dressing ran other complex worries. "Feel kind of punk this morning," he said. "Think I had too much dinner last evening. You oughtn't to serve those heavy banana fritters." "But you asked me to have some." "I know, but I tell you, when a fellow gets past 40 he has to look after his digestion. There's a lot of fellows that don't take proper care of themselves. I tell you, at 40 a man's a fool, or his doctor, his own doctor. Folks don't give enough attention to this matter of dieting. Now I think, of course, a man ought to have a good meal after the day's work, but it would be a good thing for both of us if we took lighter lunches." "But, Georgie, here at home I always do have a light lunch." "Mean to imply I make a hog of myself eating downtown?" "Yeah, sure. You'd have a swell time if you had to eat the truck that new steward hands to us at the Atlantic Club. But I certainly do feel out of sorts this morning. Funny, I got a pain down here on the left side. No, that wouldn't be appendicitis, would it? Last night, when I was driving over to Verge Gunch's, I felt a pain in my stomach, too. Right here, it was kind of a sharp shooting pain. Where'd that dime go to? Why don't you serve more prunes at breakfast? Of course, I eat an apple every evening. An apple a day keeps doctor away. But still, you ought to have more prunes, and not all those fancy doodads." "Last time I had prunes you didn't eat them." "Well, I didn't feel like eating them, I suppose. Matter of fact, I think I did eat some of them anyway. I tell you, it's mighty important to—I was saying to Verge Gunch just last evening, most people don't take sufficient care of their digest—" "Shall we have the Gunches over for dinner next week?" "Why, sure, you bet." "Now see here, George, I want you to put on your nice dinner jacket that evening."
"Rats! Rest of 'em won't want to dress."
"Of course they will. You remember when you didn't dress for the Littlefield supper party, and all the rest did, and how embarrassed you were?"
"Embarrassed, hell! I wasn't embarrassed. Everybody knows I can put on as expensive a tux as anybody else, and I should worry if I don't happen to have it on sometimes. All a darn nuisance anyway. All right for a woman that stays around the house all the time, but when a fellow's worked like the dickens all day, he doesn't want to go out and hustle his head off, getting into the soup and fish for a lot of folks that he's seen in just regular ordinary clothes that same day."
"You know you enjoy being seen in one. The other evening you admitted you were glad I'd insisted on your dressing. You said you felt a lot better for it. And, oh, Georgie, I do wish you wouldn't say tux. It's dinner jacket."
"Rats! What's the odds?"
"Well, it's what all the nice folks say. Suppose Lucille McKelvey heard you calling it a tux."
"Well, that's all right now. Lucille McKelvey can't pull anything on me. Her folks are common as mud, even if her husband and her dad are millionaires. I suppose you're trying to rub in your exalted social position. Well, let me tell you that your reverend paternal ancestor, Henry T., doesn't even call it a tux. He calls it a bobtail jacket for a ringtail monkey, and you couldn't get him into one unless you chloroformed him." "Now, don't be horrid, George." "Well, I don't want to be horrid, but Lord, you're getting as fussy as Verona. Ever since she got out of college she's been too rambunctious to live with. Doesn't know what she wants. Well, I know what she wants. All she wants is to marry a millionaire and live in Europe and hold some preacher's hand, and simultaneously at the same time stay right here in Zenith and be some blooming kind of socialist agitator or boss charity work or some damn thing. Lord, and Ted is just as bad. He wants to go to college, and he doesn't want to go to college. Only one of the three that knows her own mind is Tinka. Simply can't understand how I ever came to have a pair of shilly-shallying children like Rone and Ted. I may not be any Rockefeller or James J. Shakespeare, but I certainly do know my own mind, and I do keep right on plugging along in the office, and Do you know the latest? Far as I can figure out, Ted's new bee is he'd like to be a movie actor, and here I've told him 100 times if he'll go to college and law school and make good, I'll set him up in business, and Verona just exactly as bad. Don't know what she wants. Well, come on. Aren't you ready yet? The girl rang the bell 3 minutes ago. 5. Before he followed his wife, Babbitt stood at the westernmost window of the room. This residential settlement, Floral Heights, was on a rise, and though the center of the city was 3 miles away, Zenith had between 300,000 and 400,000 inhabitants now. He could see the top of the Second National Tower, an Indiana limestone building of 35 stories. Its shining walls rose against April sky to a simple cornice like a streak of white fire. Integrity was in the tower, and decision. It bore strength lightly as a tall soldier. As Babbitt stared, the nervousness was soothed from his face, his slack chin lifted in reverence. All he articulated was, "That's one lovely sight." But he was inspired by the rhythm of the city, his love of it renewed. He beheld the tower as a temple spire of the religion of business, of faith passionate, exalted, surpassing common men. And as he clumped down to breakfast, he whistled the ballad, "Oh, by gee, oh, by gosh, by jingo," as though it were a hymn, melancholy and noble. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Babbitt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti, MikeVendetti.com. Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis. Chapter 2. Relieved of Babbitt's bumbling and the soft grunts with which his wife expressed the sympathy she was too experienced to feel and much too experienced not to show, their bedroom settled instantly into impersonality. It gave on the sleeping porch. It served both of them as dressing-room, and on the coldest nights Babbitt luxuriously gave up the duty of being manly, and retreated to the bed inside to curl his toes in the warmth and laugh at the January gale. The room displayed a modest and pleasant color scheme, after one of the best standard designs of the decorator who did the interiors for most of the speculative builders' houses in Zenith. The walls were gray, the woodwork white, the rug a serene blue, and very much like mahogany was the furniture. The bureau with its great clear mirror, Mrs. Babbitt's dressing table with toilet articles of almost solid silver, the plain twin beds, between them a table holding a standard electric bedside lamp, a glass for water, and a standard bedside book with colored illustrations. What particular book it was cannot be ascertained, since no one had ever opened it. The mattresses were firm but not hard, triumphant modern mattresses, which had cost a great deal of money. The hot water radiator was of exactly the proper scientific surface for the cubic contents of the room. The windows were large and easily opened, with the best catches and cords, and Holland roller shades, guaranteed not to crack. It was a masterpiece among bedrooms, right out of cheerful modern houses for medium incomes. Only it had nothing to do with the Babbitts, nor with anyone else. If people had ever lived and loved there, read thrillers at midnight, and lain in beautiful indolence on a Sunday morning, there were no signs of it. It had the air of being a very good room in a very good hotel. One expected the chambermaid to come in and make it ready for people who would stay but one night, go without looking back, and never think of it again. Every second house in Floral Heights had a bedroom precisely like this. The Babbitts' house was 5 years old. It was all as competent and glossy as this bedroom. It had the best of taste, the best of inexpensive rugs, a simple and laudable architecture, and the latest conveniences. Throughout, electricity took the place of candles and slatternly hearth fires. Along the bedroom baseboard were 3 plugs for electric lamps, concealed by little brass doors. In the halls were plugs for the vacuum cleaner, and in the living room plugs for the piano lamp, for the electric fan. The trim dining room, with its admirable oak buffet, its leaded glass cupboard, its creamy plaster walls, its modest scene of a salmon expiring upon a pile of oysters,
had plugs which supplied the electric percolator and the electric toaster. In fact, there was but one thing wrong with the Babbitt house. It was not a home. 2. Often of a morning Babbitt came bouncing and jesting in to breakfast, but things were mysteriously awry today. As he pontifically treaded the upper hall, he looked into Verona's bedroom and protested,
"What's the use of giving a family a high-class house when they don't appreciate it? Tend to do business and get down to brass tacks."
He marched upon them. Verona, a dumpy, brown-haired girl of 22, just out of Bryn-Mawr, given to solicitudes about duty and sex and God and the unconquerable bagginess of the gray sports suit she was now wearing. Ted, Theodore Roosevelt Babbitt, a decorative boy of 17. Tinka, Catherine, still a baby at 10, with radiant red hair and a thin skin which hinted of too much candy and too many ice cream sodas. Babbitt did not show his vague irritation as he tramped in. He really disliked being a family tyrant, and his nagging was as meaningless as it was frequent. He shouted at Tinka,
"Well, Kitty Doodle."
It was the only pet name in his vocabulary, except for the dear and hun with which he recognized his wife, and he flung it at Tinka every morning. He gulped a cup of coffee in the hope of pacifying his stomach and his soul. His stomach ceased to feel as though it did not belong to him, but Verona began to be conscientious and annoying, and abruptly there returned to Babbitt the doubts regarding life and families and business which had clawed at him when his dream life and the slim fairy girl had fled. Verona had for 6 months been filing clerk at the Gruensberg Leather Company offices, with a prospect of becoming secretary to Mr. Gruensberg, and thus, as Babbitt defined it, getting some good out of your expensive college education till you're ready to marry and settle down. But now, said Verona, "Father, I was talking to a classmate of mine that's working for the Associated Charities. Oh, Dad, there's the sweet little babies that come to the milk station there, and feel as though I ought to be doing something worthwhile like that."
"What do you mean, worthwhile?" "If you get to be Gutenberg's secretary, and maybe you would if you kept up your shorthand and didn't go sneaking off to concert and talk fest every evening, I guess you'll find 35 or 40 bones a week worthwhile."
"I know, but I want to contribute. I wish I were working in a settlement house. I wonder if I could get one of the department stores to let me put in a welfare department and a nice restroom and chintzes and wicker chairs and so on and so forth. Or I could—"
"Now, you look here. The first thing you got to understand is that all this uplift and flip-flop and settlement work and recreation is nothing in God's world but the entering wedge for socialism. Sooner a man learns he isn't going to be coddled, and he needn't expect a lot of free grub and all these free classes and flip-flop and doodads for the kids unless he earns 'em, why, the sooner he'll get up on the job and produce, produce, produce. That's what the country needs, and not all this fancy stuff that just enfeebles the willpower of the working man and gives his kids a lot of notions above their class. And you, if you'd tend to business instead of fooling and fussing all the time. When I was a young man I made up my mind what I wanted to do, and stuck to it through thick and thin, and that's why I'm where I am today. Myra, what do you let this girl chop the toast up into these dinky little chunks for? Can't get your fist onto 'em. Half cold anyway."
Ted Babbitt, junior in the great Eastlake High School, had been making hiccup-like sounds of interruption. He blurted now, "Say, Roan, you going to—"
Verona whirled.
"Ted, will you kindly not interrupt us when we're talking about serious matters?"
"Ah, punk," said Tech judiciously. "Ever since somebody slipped up and let you out of college, ammonia, you've been pulling these nut conversations about what-nots and so on and so forth.
Are you going to— I want to use the car tonight."
Babbitt snorted. "Oh, you do? May want it myself."
Verona protested. "Oh, will you do, Mr. Smarty? I'm going to take it myself." Tinka wailed, "Oh, Papa, you said maybe you'd drive us down to Rosedale.
Mrs. Babbitt, "Careful, Tinka, your sleeve is in the butter." They glared, and Verona hurled,
"Ted, you're a perfect pig about the car." "Course you're not. Not at all."
Ted could be maddeningly bland.
"You just want to grab it off right after dinner, and leave it in front of some skirt's house all evening while you sit and gas about literature and the highbrows you're going to marry, if they only propose. Well, Dad oughtn't to ever let you have it. You and those beastly Jones boys drive like maniacs. The idea of your taking that turn on the Chippewa place at 40 miles an hour! Where do you get all that stuff? You're so darn scared of the car that you drive uphill with the emergency brake on." "I do not. And you, always talking about how much you know about the motors, and Eunice Littlefield told me you said the battery fed the generator." Why, my good woman, you don't know a generator from a differential."
Not unreasonably was Ted lofty with her. He was a natural mechanic, a maker and tinkerer of machines. He lisped in blueprints, for the blueprints came. "That'll do now," Babbitt flung in mechanically, as he lighted the gloriously satisfying first cigar of the day and tasted the exhilarating drug of the Advocate-Times headlines.
Ted negotiated, "Gee, honest, Rone, I don't want to take that old boat, but I promised a couple of girls here in my class I'd drive 'em down to the rehearsal of the school chorus, and gee, I don't want to, but a gentleman's got to keep his social engagements." "Well, upon my word, you and your social engagements in high school!" "Oh, ain't we select since we went to the Hen College! Let me tell you, there isn't a private school in the state that's got a swell up bunch of guys we got in Gamma Di Gamma this year. There's 2 fellows that their dads are millionaires. Say, gee, I ought to have a car of my own, like lots of the fellows."
Babbitt almost rose.
"A car of your own? Don't you want a yacht and a house and a lot? That pretty nearly takes the cake. Boy that can't pass his Latin examinations like any other boy ought to, and he expects me to give him a motor car, and I suppose a chauffeur and an aeroplane, maybe, as a reward for the hard work he puts in going to the movies with Eunice Littlefield. Well, when you see me giving you—"
Somewhat later, after diplomacies, Ted persuaded Verona to admit that she was merely going to the Armory the evening to see the dog and cat show. She was then, Ted planned, to park the car in front of the candy store across from the Armory, and he would pick it up. There were masterly arrangements regarding leaving the key and making the gasoline tank filled. And passionately devotees of the great god motor, they hummed a patch on the spare inner tube and the lost jack-handle. Their truce dissolving, Ted observed that her friends were a scream of a bunch of stuck-up gabby four-flushers. His friends, she indicated, were disgusting imitation sports and horrid little shrieking ignorant girls. Further, "It's disgusting of you to smoke cigarettes," and so on and so forth, "and those clothes you've got on this morning, they're too utterly ridiculous. Honestly, simply disgusting." Ted balanced over to the low beveled mirror on the buffet, regarding his charms, and smirked. His suit, the latest thing in old Eli togs, was skin-tight with skimpy trousers to the tops of his gleaming tan boots, a chorus man waistline, pattern of agitated check, and across the back a belt which belted nothing. His scarf was an enormous black silk wad. His flaxen hair was ice-smooth, pasted down without parting. When he went to school he would add a cap with a long visor, like a shovel-blade. Proudest of all was he of his waistcoat, saved for, begged for, plotted for, a real fancy vest of fawn with polka dots of a decayed red, the points astoundingly long. On the lower edge of it he wore a high school button, a class button, and a fraternity pin. And none of it mattered. He was supple and swift and flushed. His eyes, which he believed to be cynical, were candidly eager, but he was not over-gentle. He waved his hand at poor dumpy Verona and drawled, "Yes, I guess you're pretty ridiculous and disgustingous,
and I rather guess our new necktie is some smear."
Babbitt barked, "It is. And while you're admiring yourself, let me tell you, it might add to your manly beauty if you wiped some of that egg off your mouth."
Verona giggled, momentarily victor in the greatest of great wars, which is the family war. Ted looked at her hopelessly, and shrieked at Tinka, "For love of Pete, quit pouring the whole sugar bowl on your cornflakes!" When Verona and Ted were gone, and Tinka upstairs, Babbitt groaned to his wife,
"Nice family, I must say. I don't pretend to be a baa lamb, and maybe I'm a little cross-grained at breakfast sometimes, but the way they go on jabbering, I simply can't stand it. I swear, I feel like going off some place where I can get a little peace. I do think after a man spent his lifetime trying to give his kids a chance at a decent education, it's pretty discouraging to hear them all the time scrapping like a bunch of hyenas and never. Curious, here in the paper it says, never silent for one See the morning paper yet?"
"No, dear." In 23 years of married life, Mrs. Babbitt had seen the paper before her husband just 67 times.
"Lots of news. Terrible big tornado in the south. Hard luck, all right. But this is corking. Beginning of the end for those fellows. New York Assembly has passed some bills that ought to completely outlaw the socialists. And there's an elevator runner strike in New York, and a lot of college boys are taking their places. That's the stuff. And mass meeting in Birmingham demanded that this McAgitator, this fellow de Valera, be deported. Dead right, by golly. All those agitators paid with German gold anyway, and we got no business interfering with the Irish or any other foreign government. Keep our hands strictly off. And there's another well-authenticated rumor from Russia that Lenin is dead. That's fine. Beyond me why we don't just step in there and kick those Bolshevik cusses out."
"That's so," added Mrs. Babbitt.
"And it says here a fellow is inaugurated mayor in overalls, a preacher, too. What do you think of that?" Well."
He searched for an attitude, but neither as a Republican, a Presbyterian, an Elk, nor a real estate broker did he have any doctrine about preacher-mayor laid down for him. So he grunted and went on. She looked sympathetic and did not hear a word. Later she would read the headlines, the society columns, and the department store advertisements.
"What do you know about this? Charlie McKelvey still doing his society stint as heavy as ever. Here's what that gushy woman reporter says about last night.
Never is society with the big S, more flattered than when they are bidden to partake of good cheer at the distinguished and hospitable residence of Mr. and Mrs. Charles L. McKelvey,
as they were last night.
Set in its spacious lawns and landscaping, one of the notable sights crowning Royal Ridge, but merry and homelike despite its mighty stone walls and its vast rooms famed for their decoration. Their home was thrown open last night for a dance in honor of Mr. McKelvey's notable guest, Miss J. Sneath of Washington. The wide hall is so generous in its proportions that it made a perfect ballroom, its hardwood floor reflecting the charming pageant above its polished surface. Even the delights of dancing paled before the alluring opportunities of tete-a-tetes, and invited the soul to loaf in the long library before the baronial fireplace, or in the drawing-room with its deep comfy armchairs, its shaded lamps just made for a sly whisper of pretty nothings à deux, or even in the billiard-room, where one could take a cue and show up prowess at still another game that sponsored by Cupid and Tropic Score. There was more, a great deal more, in the best urban journalistic style of Miss Elona Pearl Bates, the popular society editor of the Advocate-Times. But Babbitt could not abide it. He grunted. He wrinkled the newspaper. He protested.
"Can you beat it? I'm willing to hand a lot of credit to Charlie McKelvey. When we were in college together, he was just as hard up as any of us, and he made $1 million good bucks out of the contracting and hasn't been any dishonester or bought any more city councils than was necessary. And that's a good house of his. Though it ain't any mighty stone walls,
and it ain't worth the 90,000 it cost him. But when it comes to talking as though Charlie McKelvey and all that booze-hoisting set of his are any bloomin' bunch of Vanderbilt, why, it makes me tired." Timidly from Mrs. Babbitt, "I would like to see the inside of their house, though. It must be lovely. I've never been inside."
"Well, I have. Couple of times. To see Chaz about business deals in the evening. It's not so much. I wouldn't want to go there for dinner with that gang of high binders. And I'll bet I make a whole lot more money than some of those tin horns that spend all they got on dress suits and haven't got a decent suit of underwear to their name. Hey, what do you think of this?"
Mrs. Babbitt was strangely unmoved by the tidings from the real estate and building column of the Advocate-Times. Ashtabula Street, 496 J. K. Dawson to Thomas Mullany, April 17, 15/7 by 112.2, mortgage $4,000, Nom. And this morning Babbitt was too disquieted to entertain her with items from mechanics' liens, mortgages recorded, and contracts awarded. He rose. As he looked at her his eyebrows seemed shaggier than usual. Suddenly,
"Yep, maybe. Some kind of shame to not keep in touch with folks like the McKelveys. We might try inviting them to dinner some evening. Oh, thunder, it's not waste our time thinking about 'em. Our little bunch has a lot livelier times than those plutes. Just compare a real human like you with those neurotic birds like Lucille McKelvey, all highbrow talk and dressed up like a plush horse. You're a great old girl, hon."
He covered his betrayal of softness with a complaining,
"Say, don't let Tinka go and eat any more of those poison nut fudge. For heaven's sake, try to keep her from ruining her digestion. I tell you, most folks don't appreciate how important it is to have good digestion and regular habits. Be back about usual time, I guess."
He kissed her. He didn't quite kiss her. He laid unmoving lips against her unflushing cheek. He hurried out to the garage, muttering,
"Lord, what a family! And now Myra's going to get pathetic on me because we don't train with the millionaire outfit. Oh, Lord, sometimes I'd like to quit the whole game. And the office worry and detail just as bad. And I act cranky, and I don't mean to, but I get so darn tired."
End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Babbitt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti. MikeVendetti.com. Babbitt. By Sinclair Lewis. Chapter 3. To George F. Babbitt, as to most prosperous citizens of Zenith, his motor car was poetry and tragedy, love and heroism. The office was his pirate ship, but the car his perilous excursion ashore. Among the tremendous crises of each day, none was more dramatic than starting the engine. It was slow on cold mornings. There was the long, anxious whir of the starter, and sometimes he had to drip ether into the cocks of the cylinders, which was so very interesting that at lunch he would chronicle it drop by drop, and orally calculate how much each drop had cost him. This morning he was darkly prepared to find something wrong, and he felt belittled when the mixture exploded sweet and strong, and the car didn't even brush the door jamb, gouged and splintery with many bruisings by fenders, as he backed out of the garage. He was confused. He shouted "Mornin'" to Sam Doppelbrau with more cordiality than he had intended. Babbitt's green and white Dutch colonial house was one of three on that block of Chatham Road. To the left of it was the residence of Mr. Samuel Doppelbrau, secretary of an excellent firm of bathroom fixture jobbers. His was a comfortable house with no architectural manners whatever. A large wooden box with a squat tower, a broad porch, and glossy paint, yellow as a yolk. Babbitt disapproved of Mr. and Mrs. Doppelbrau as bohemian. From their house came midnight music and obscene laughter. There were neighborhood rumors of bootleg whiskey and fast motor rides. They furnished Babbitt with many happy evenings of discussion, during which he announced firmly,
"I'm not straight-laced, and I don't mind seeing a fellow throw a drink once in a while, But when it comes to deliberately trying to get away with a lot of hell-raising, all the while like the Doppelros do, it's too rich for my blood."
On the other side of Babbitt lived Howard Littlefield, Ph.D., in a strictly modern house whereof the lower part was dark red tapestry brick with a leaded oriel, the upper part of pale stucco, like spattered clay, and the roof red-tiled. Littlefield was the great scholar of the neighborhood, the authority on everything in the world except babies, cooking, and motors. He was a Bachelor of Arts of Blodgett College and a Doctor of Philosophy and Economics of Yale. He was the employment manager and publicity counsel of the Zenith Street Traction Company. He could, on 10 hours' notice, appear before the Board of Aldermen or the State Legislature and prove absolutely, with figures all in rows and with precedents from Poland and New Zealand, that the streetcar company loved the public and yearned over its employees, that all its stock was owned by widows and orphans, and that whatever it desired to do would benefit property owners by increasing rental values and help the poor by lowering rents. All his acquaintances turned to Littlefield when they desired to know the date of the Battle of Saragossa, the definition of the word sabotage, the future of the German mark, the translation of Hinc Illiae Lacrimoni, or the number of products of coal tar. He awed Babbitt by confessing that he often sat up till midnight, reading the figures and footnotes in government reports or skimming, with amusement at the author's mistakes, the latest volumes of chemistry, archaeology, and ichthyology. But Littlefield's great value was as a spiritual example. Despite his strange learnings, he was as strict a Presbyterian and as firm a Republican as George F. Babbitt. He confirmed the business men in the faith, where they knew only by passionate instinct that their system of industry and manners was perfect. Dr. Howard Littlefield proved it to them, out of history, economics, and the confessions of reformed radicals. Babbitt had a good deal of honest pride in being the neighbor of such a savant, and in Ted's intimacy with Eunice Littlefield. At 16, Eunice was interested in no statistics save those regarding the ages and salaries of motion-picture stars. But as Babbitt definitively put it, she was her father's daughter. The difference between a light man like Sam Doppelbrau and a very fine character like Littlefield was revealed in their appearances. Doppelbrau was disturbingly young for a man of 48. He wore his derby on the back of his head, and his red face was wrinkled with meaningless laughter. But Littlefield was an old man of 42. He was tall, broad, thick. His gold-rimmed spectacles were engulfed in the folds of his long face. His hair was a tossed mass of greasy blackness. He puffed and rumbled as he talked. His Phi Beta Kappa key shone against the spotty black vest. He smelled of old pipes. He was altogether funereal and archidonical, and to real estate brokerage and the jobbing of bathroom fixtures he added an aroma of sanctity. This morning he was in front of his house, inspecting the grass parking between the curb and the broad cement sidewalk. Babbitt stopped his car and leaned out to shout, "Mornin'!" Littlefield lumbered over and stood with one foot up on the running board. "Fine morning," said Babbitt, lighting, illegally early, his second cigar of the day. "Yes, it's a mighty fine morning," said Littlefield. "Spring come along fast now." "Yes, it's real spring now, all right," said Littlefield. "Still cold nights, though. Had to have a couple of blankets on the sleeping porch last night." "Yes, it wasn't any too warm last night," said Littlefield. "But I don't anticipate we'll have any more real cold weather now." "No, but still, there was snow at Taffa's, Montana, yesterday," said the scholar. "And you remember the blizzard they had out west 3 days ago, 30 inches of snow in Greeley, Colorado. And 2 years ago we had a snow squall right here in Zenith on the 25th of April. "Is that a fact? Say, old man, what do you think about the Republican candidate? Who'll they nominate for president? Don't you think it's about time we had a real business administration?" "In my opinion, What the country needs first and foremost is a good, sound, businesslike conduct of its affairs. What we need is a business administration," said Littlefield.
"I'm glad to hear you say that. I certainly am glad to hear you say that. I don't know how you'd feel about it, with all your associations with colleges and so on, and I'm glad you feel that way. What the country needs just at this present juncture is neither a college president nor a lot of monkeying with foreign affairs, but a good, sound, economical business administration that will give us a chance to have something like a decent turnover."
Yes, it isn't generally realized that even in China the schoolmen are giving way to more practical men, and of course you can see what that implies.
"It is a fact. Well," breathed Babbitt,
Feeling much calmer and much happier about the way things were going in the world.
"Well, it's been nice to stop and parlez-vous a second. Guess I'll have to get down to the office now and sting a few clients. Well, so long, old man. See you tonight. So long."
2. They had labored, these solid citizens, 20 years before. The hill on which Floral Heights was spread, with its bright roofs and immaculate turf and amazing comfort, had been a wilderness of rank second-growth elms and oaks and maples. Along the precise streets were still a few wooded vacant lots and the fragment of an old orchard. It was brilliant today. The apple boughs were lit with fresh leaves like torches of green fire. The first white of cherry blossoms flickered down a gully, and robins clamored. Babbitt sniffed the earth, chuckled at the hysteric robins, as he would have chuckled at kittens or at a comic movie. He was, to the eye, the perfect office-going executive, a well-fed man in a correct brown soft hat and frameless spectacles, smoking a large cigar, driving a good motor along a semi-suburban parkway. But in him was some genius of authentic love for his neighborhood, his city, his clan. The winter was over. The time has come for the building, the visible growth, which to him was glory. He lost his dawn depression. He was ruddily cheerful, and he stopped on Smith Street to leave the brown trousers and to have the gasoline tank filled. The familiarity of the rite fortified him. The sight of the tall red iron gasoline pump, the hollow tile and terracotta garage, the window full of the most agreeable accessories, shiny casings, spark plugs, and immaculate porcelain jacklets, tire chains of gold and silver. He was flattered by the friendliness with which Sylvester Moon, dirtiest and most skilled of motor mechanics, came out to serve him.
"Morning, Mr. Babbitt,"
said Moon, and Babbitt himself felt person of importance, one whose name even busy garagemen remembered, not one of those cheap sports flying around in flivvers. He admired the ingenuity of the automatic dial, clicking off gallon by gallon, admired the smartness of the sign, "A fill in time saves getting stuck. Gas today 31 cents." Admired the rhythmic gurgle of the gasoline as it flowed into the tank, and the mechanical regularity with which Moon turned the handle.
"How much we taking today?"
asked Moon in a manner which combined the independence of a great specialist, the friendliness of a familiar gossip, and respect for a man of weight in the community like George F. Babbitt.
"Fill her up." "Who you rooting for Republican candidate, Mr. Babbitt?" "It's too early to make any predictions yet. After all, there's still a good month and 2 weeks. No, 3 weeks. Must be almost 3 weeks. Well, there's more than 6 weeks in all before the Republican convention, and I feel a fellow ought to keep an open mind and give all the candidates a show. Look 'em all over and size 'em up, and then decide carefully."
"That's a fact, Mr. Babbitt."
"But I'll tell you. And my stand on this is just the same as it was 4 years ago and 8 years ago, and it'll be my stand 4 years from now. Yes, and 8 years from now. What I tell everybody, and it can't be too generally understood, is that what we need first, last, and all the time is a good, sound business administration."
"By golly, that's right."
"How do those front tires look to you?"
"Fine, fine.
Wouldn't be much work for garages if everybody looked after their cars the way you do." "Well, I do try to have some sense about it."
Babbitt paid his bill, said adequately,
"Oh, keep the change,"
and drove off in an ecstasy of honest self-appreciation. It was with the manner of a good Samaritan that he shouted at a respectable-looking man who was waiting for a trolley car,
"Have a lift?"
As the man climbed in, Babbitt condescended,
"Going clear downtown? Whenever I see a fellow waiting for a trolley, I always make it a practice to give him a lift. Unless, of course, he looks like a bum."
"Wish there were more folks that were so generous with their machines," dutifully said the victim of benevolence.
"Oh, no, 'tain't a question of generosity, hardly. Fact, I always feel, I was saying to my son just the other night, it's a fellow's duty to share the good things of his world with his neighbors, and it gets my goat when a fellow gets stuck on himself and goes around tooting his horn merely because he's charitable."
The victim seemed unable to find the right answer. Babbitt boomed on,
"Pretty punk service the company giving us on these car lines. Nonsense to only run the Portland Road cars once every 7 minutes. Fellow gets mighty cold on a winter morning, waiting on a street corner with the wind nipping at his ankles."
"That's right. The street car company doesn't care a damn what kind of a deal they give us. Something ought to happen to 'em." Babbitt was alarmed.
But still, of course, it won't do to just keep knocking the traction company and not realize the difficulties they're operating under. Like these cranks that want municipal ownership. The way these workmen hold up the company for high wages is simply a crime. And, of course, the burden falls on you and me that have to pay a 7-cent fare. Fact, there's remarkable service on all their lines, considering."
"Well," uneasily,
"Darn fine morning," Babbitt explained. "Spring coming along fast."
"Yes, it's a real spring now." The victim had no originality, no wit, and Babbitt fell into a great silence and devoted himself to the game of beating trolley cars to the corner, a spurt, a tail chase, nervous speeding between the huge yellow side of the trolley and the jagged row of parked cars, shooting past just as the trolley stopped, a rare game and valiant. And all the while he was conscious of the loveliness of Zenith. For weeks together he noticed nothing but clients and the vexing to-rent signs of rival brokers. Today, in mysterious malaise, he raged or rejoiced with equal nervousness, swiftness, and today the light of spring was so winsome that he lifted his head and saw. He admired each district along his familiar route to the office, the bungalows and shrubs and winding irregular drives of Floral Heights, the one-story shops on Smith Street, a glare of plate glass and new yellow brick, groceries and laundries and drug-stores to supply the more immediate needs of East Side housewives, the market gardens in Dutch Hollow, their shanties patched with corrugated tin and stolen doors, billboards with crimson godliness 9 feet tall, advertising cinema films, pipe tobacco, and talcum powder, the old mansions along Ninth Street southeast, like aged dandies in filthy linen, wooden castles turned into boarding-houses, with muddy walks and rusty hedges, jostled by fast-intruding garages, cheap apartment houses and fruit stands conducted by bland, sleek Athenians. Across the belt of railroad tracks, factories with high-perched water tanks, and tall stacked factories producing condensed milk, paper boxes, lighting fixtures, motor cars. Then the business center, the thickening, daring traffic, the crammed trolleys unloading, the high doorways of marble and polished granite. It was big. And Babbitt respected bigness in anything, in mountains, jewels, muscles, wealth, or words. He was, for a spring-enchanted moment, the lyric and almost unselfish lover of Zenith. He thought of the outlying factory suburbs, of the Chassalusa River, with its strongly eroded banks, of the orchard-dappled Tawadana hills to the north, and all the fat dairy land and big barns and comfortable herds. As he dropped his passenger, he cried, "Gosh, I feel pretty good this morning." 3. Epical as starting the car was the drama of parking it before he entered his office. As he turned from Oberlin Avenue round the corner onto 3rd Street northeast, he peered ahead for a space in the line of parked cars. He angrily just missed a space as a rival driver slid into it. Ahead another car was leaving the curb, and Babbitt slowed up, holding out his hand to the cars pressing on him from behind, agitatedly motioning an old woman to go ahead, avoiding a truck which bore down on him from one side, with front wheels nicking the wrought-iron bumper of the car in front. He stopped feverishly, cramped his steering wheel, slid back into the vacant space, and, with 18 inches of room, maneuvered to bring the car level with the curb. It was a vile adventure masterfully executed. With satisfaction, he locked a thief-proof steel wedge on the front wheel and crossed the street to his real estate office on the ground floor of the Reeves Building. The Reeves Building was as fireproof as a rock and as efficient as a typewriter. 14 stories of yellow pressed brick, with clean, upright, unornamented lines. It was filled with the offices of lawyers, doctors, agents for machinery, for emery wheels, for wire fencing, for mining stock. Their gold signs shone on the windows. The entrance was too modern and to be flamboyant with pillars. It was quiet, shrewd, neat. Along the 3rd Street side were a Western Union Telegraph office, the Blue Delft Candy Shop, Shotwell Stationery Shop, and the Babbitt Thompson Realty Company. Babbitt could have entered his office from the street, as customers did, but it made him feel an insider to go through the corridor of the building and enter by the back door. Thus he was greeted by the villagers, the little unknown people who inhabited the Reeve Building corridors, elevator runners, starter, engine superintendent, and the doubtful-looking lame man who conducted the news and cigar stand. They were in no way city dwellers. They were rustics, living in a constricted valley, interested only in one another and in the building. Their main street was the entrance hall, with its stone floor, severe marble ceiling, and the inner window of the shops. The liveliest place on the street was the Reeves Building barber shop, but this was also Babbitt's one embarrassment. Himself, he patronized the glittering Pomagan barber shop in the Hotel Thornlow, and every time he passed the Reeves shop, 10 times a day, 100 times, he felt untrue to his own village. Now, as one of the squirearchy, greeted with honorable salutation by the villagers, he marched into his office, and peace and dignity were upon him, and the morning's dissonances all unheard. They were heard again immediately. Stanley Graff, the outside salesman, was talking on the telephone with tragic lack of that firm manner which disciplines clients. "Say, I think I got the house that would suit you. The Percival House in Linton." "Oh, you've seen it? Well, how did it strike you?" "Huh? Oh." Irresolutely. "Oh, I see." As Babbitt marched into his private room, a coupe with semi-partition of oak and frosted glass, at the back of the office, he reflected how hard it was to find employees who had his own faith that he was going to make sales. There were 9 members of the staff besides Babbitt and his partner and father-in-law, Henry Thompson, who rarely came into the office. The 9 were Stanley Graff, the outside salesman, a youngish man given to cigarettes and the playing of pool; old Mat Penniman, general utility man, collector of rents and salesman of insurance; broken, silent, gray, a mystery, reputed to have been a crack real estate man with the firm of his own in haughty Brooklyn; Chester Kirby Laylock, resident salesman out at the Glen Oriole acreage development, an enthusiastic person with a silky mustache and much family; Miss Teresa McElwain, the swift and rather pretty stenographer; Miss Wilberta Bennigan, the thick, slow, laborious accountant and file clerk; and 4 free-lance part-time commission salesmen. As he looked from his own cage into the main room, Babbitt mourned, "McGowan's a good stenog, smart as a whip, but Stan Graff and all those bums." The zest of the spring morning was smothered in the stale office air. Normally he admired the office with a pleased surprise that he could have created this sure lovely thing. Normally he was stimulated by the clean newness of it and the air of bustle, but today it seemed flat. The tiled floor, like a bathroom, the ochre-colored metal ceiling, the faded maps on the hard plaster walls, the chairs of varnished pale oak, the desks and filing cabinets of steel painted in olive drab. It was a vault, a steel chapel where loafing and laughter were raw sin. He hadn't even any satisfaction in the new water-cooler, and it was the very best water-cooler, up-to-date, scientific, and right-thinking. It had cost a great deal of money, in itself a virtue. It possessed a non-conducting fiber ice container, a porcelain water jar, guaranteed hygienic, a dripless, non-clogging sanitary faucet, and machine-painted decorations in two tones of gold. He looked down the relentless stretch of tiled floor at the water cooler, and assured himself that no tenant of the Reeves Building had a more expensive one. But he could not recapture the feeling of social superiority it had given him. He astoundingly grunted, "I'd like to beat it off to the woods right now and loaf all day. Go to Grunch's again tonight, play poker, and cuss as much as I feel like, and drink 109,000 bottles of beer." He sighed. He read through his mail. He shouted McGowan, which meant Miss McGowan, and began to dictate. This was his own version of his first letter. "Omar Gribble. Send it to his office, Miss McGowan. Yours of 20th to hand in and reply would say, look here, Gribble, I'm awfully afraid if we go on shilly-shallying like this, we'll just naturally lose the Allen sale. I had Allen up on the carpet day before yesterday, got right down to cases, and think I can assure you, no, change that. All my experience indicates he is all right, means to do business. Looked into financial record, which is fine. That sentence seems to be a little balled up. Miss Gowan, make a couple of sentences out of it if you have to. Period, new paragraph. He is perfectly willing to prorate the special assessment, and strikes me I'm dead sure there will be no difficulty in getting him to pay for title insurance. So now, for heaven's sake, let's get busy. No, make it that. So now let's go to it and get down. No, that's enough. You can tie those sentences up a little better when you type 'em. Miss McGowan, yours sincerely, etc." This is the version of his letter which he received typed from Miss McGowan that afternoon. Babbitt Thompson Realty Company. Homes for Folks. Reeves Building, Oberlin Avenue and 3rd Street, Northeast, Zenith. Omar Gribble, Esquire, 376 North American Building, Zenith. Dear Mr. Gribble, your letter of the 20th to hand, I must say I'm awfully afraid that if we go on shilly-shallying like this, we'll just naturally lose the Allen sale. I had Allen up on the carpet day before yesterday, and got right down to cases. All my experience indicates that he means to do business. I have also looked into his financial record, which is fine. He is perfectly willing to prorate the special assessment, and there will be no difficulty in getting him to pay for title insurance. So let's go. Yours sincerely. As he read and signed it in his correct flowing business college hand, Babbitt reflected, "Now that's a good strong letter, and clear as a bell. Now what I never told McGowan to make a third paragraph here. Wish he'd quit trying to improve on my dictation. But what I can't understand is why can't Stan Graff or Chet Labig write a letter like that, with punch, with kick." The most important thing he dictated that morning was the fortnightly form letter to be mimeographed and sent out to 1,000 prospects. It was diligently imitative of the best literary models of the day, of heart-to-heart talk advertisements, sales-pulling letters, disclosures on the development of will-power, and hand-shaking house organs, as richly poured forth by the new school of poets of business. He had painfully written out the first draft, and he intoned it now like a poet, delicate and distinct. "Say, old man, I just wanted to know, can I do you a whale of a favor? Honest, no kidding. I know you're interested in getting a house, not merely a place where you hang up the old bonnet, but a love nest for the wife and kiddies, and maybe for the flivver out beyond. Be sure to spell Beyyant, Miss McGowan. The Spud Garden. Say, did you ever stop to think that we're here to save you trouble? That's how I make a living. Folks don't pay us for our lovely beauty. Now take a look. Sit down at that handsome carved mahogany escritoire and shoot us a line telling us just what you want, and if we can find it, we'll come hopping down to your lane with the good tidings, and if we can't, we won't bother you. To save your time, just fill out the blank enclosed. On request, we'll also send blank recording store properties in Floral Heights, Silver Grove, Linton, Bellevue, and all East Side residential district. Yours for service. P.S. Just a hint of some plums we can pick for you.
Some genuine bargains that came in today. Silver Grove, cute, 4-room California bungalow, AMI garage, dandy shade tree, swell neighborhood, handy car line. $3,780 down and balance liberal. Babbitt Thompson terms cheaper than rent. Dorchester, a corker. Artistic two-family house, all oak trim, parquet floors, lovely gas log, big porches, colonial, heated all-weather garage, a bargain, $11,250. Dictation over, with its need of sitting and thinking instead of bustling around and making a noise and really doing something. Babbitt sat creakily back in his revolving desk chair and beamed on Miss McGowan. He was conscious of her as a girl, of black bobbed hair against demure cheeks. A longing which was indistinguishable from loneliness enfeebled him. While he waited, tapping a long, precise pencil point on the desk tablet, he half identified her with the fairy girl of his dreams. He imagined their eyes meeting with terrifying recognition, imagined touching her lips with frightened reverence, and she was chirping, "Any more, Mr. Babbitt?" He grunted, "That winds it up, I guess," and turned heavily away. For all his wandering thoughts, they had never been more intimate than this. He often reflected, "Never forgot how old Jake Offutt said a wise bird never goes love-making in his own office or his own home. Start trouble, sure, but—" In 23 years of married life he had peered uneasily at every graceful ankle, every soft shoulder. In thought he had treasured them, but not once had he hazarded respectability by adventuring. Now, as he calculated the cost of repapering the Stykes house, he was restless again, discontented about nothing and everything, ashamed of his discontentment, and lonely for the fairy girl. End of Chapter 3.
Chapter 4 of Babbitt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti, MikeVendetti.com. Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis. Chapter 4. It was a morning of artistic creation. 15 minutes after the purple prose of Babbitt's form letter, Chester Kirby Laylock, the resident salesman at Glen Oriole, came in to report a sale and submit an advertisement. Babbitt disapproved of Laylock, who sang in choirs and was merry at home over games of hearts and Old Maid. He had a tenor voice, wavy chestnut hair, and a mustache like a camel's hair brush. Babbitt considered it excusable in a family man to growl, "Seen this new picture of the kid? Husky little devil, huh?" But Laylock's domestic confidences were as bubbling as a girl's. "Say, I think I got a peach of an ad for the Glen, Mr. Babbitt. Why don't we try something in poetry? Honest, it'd have wonderful pulling power. Listen. 'Mid pleasures and palaces wherever you may roam, just provide the little bride and we'll provide the home.' Do you get it? See? Like Home Sweet Home, don't you?"
Yes, hell yes, of course I get it. But I think we better use something more dignified and forceful, like 'We lead, others follow,' or eventually 'Why not now?' Of course, I believe in using poetry and humor and all that junk when it turns the trick, but with a high-class restricted development like the Glen, we better stick to the more dignified approach. See how I mean? Well, I guess that's all this morning, Chet."
2. By a tragedy familiar to the world of art, the April enthusiasm of Chet Laylock served only to stimulate the talent of the older craftsman, George F. Babbitt. He grumbled to Stanley Graff, "That tan-colored voice of Chet's gets on my nerves." Yet he was aroused, and in one swoop he wrote, "Do you respect your loved ones? When the last sad rites of bereavement are over, do you know for certain you've done your best for their departed? You haven't, unless they lie in the cemetery beautiful, Linden Lane, the only strictly up-to-date burial place in or near Zenith, where exquisitely gardened plots look from daisy-dotted hill slopes across the smiling fields of Dorchester. Sole agents, Babbitt Thompson Realty Company, Reeves Building." He rejoiced, "I guess that'll show Chan Mott and his weedy old Wildwood Cemetery something about modern merchandising." 3.
He sent Matt Penniman to the recorder's office to dig out the names of the owners of houses which were displaying for rent signs of other brokers. He talked to a man who desired to lease a store building for a pool room. He ran over the list of home leases which were about to expire. He sent Thomas Baywaters, a streetcar conductor who played at real estate in spare time, to call on side street prospects who were unworthy the strategies of Stanley Graff. But he had spent his credulous excitement of creation, and these routine details annoyed him. One moment of heroism he had in discovering a new way of stopping smoking. He stopped smoking at least once a month. He went through it like the solid citizen he was, admitted the evils of tobacco, courageously made resolves, laid out plans to check the vice, tapered off his allowance of cigars, and expounded the pleasures of virtuousness to every one he met. He did everything, in fact, except stop smoking. 2 months before, by ruling out a schedule, noting down the hour, the minute of each smoke, and ecstatically increasing the intervals between smokes, he had brought himself down to 3 cigars a day. Then he had lost the schedule. A week ago he had invented a system of leaving his cigar case and cigarette box in an unused drawer at the bottom of the correspondence file in the outer office.
"I'll just naturally be ashamed to go poking in there all day long, making a fool of myself before my own employees," he reasoned.
By the end of 3 days he was trained to leave his desk, walk to the file, take out and light a cigar, without knowing that he was doing it. This morning it was revealed to him that it had been too easy to open the file. Lock it. That was a thing. Inspired, he rushed out and locked up his cigars, his cigarettes, and even his box of safety matches, and the key to the file drawer he hid in his desk. But the crusading passion of it made him so tobacco-hungry that he immediately recovered the key, walked with forbidding dignity to the file, took out a cigar and a match. But only one match. If old cigar goes out, it'll by golly have to stay out. Later, when the cigar did go out, he took one more match from the file, and when a buyer and a seller came in for a conference at 11:30, naturally he had to offer them cigars. His conscience protested, "Why, you're smoking with them." But he bullied it. Shut up. I'm busy now." Of course, by and by. There was no by and by, yet his belief that he had crushed the unclean habit made him feel noble and very happy. When he called up Paul Riesling, he was in his moral splendor, unusually eager. He was fonder of Paul Riesling than any one on earth, except himself and his daughter Tinka. They had been classmates, roommates in the State University, but always he thought of Paul Riesling, with his dark slimness, his precisely parted hair, his nose-glasses, his hesitant speech, his moodiness, his love of music, as a younger brother, to be petted and protected. Paul had gone into his father's business after graduation. He was now a wholesaler and small manufacturer of prepared paper roofing. But Babbitt strenuously believed, and lengthily announced to the world of good fellows, that Paul could have been a great violinist or painter or writer.
"Why, say, the letters that boy sent me on his trip to the Canadian Rockies, they just absolutely make you see the place as if you were standing there. Believe me, he could have given any of those bloomin' authors a whale of a run for their money."
Yet on the telephone he said only,
"South 343. No, I said south. South 343. Say, operator, what the dickens is the trouble? Can't you get me South 343? Why, certainly they'll answer. Oh, hello, 343? Want to speak to Mr. Riesling. Mr. Babbitt talking. Hello, Paul."
"Yeah."
"Yes, George speaking."
"Yeah."
"How's old socks?"
"Fair middlin'. How are you?"
"Fine. Fabulous. Well, what do you know?"
"Oh, nothing much."
"Where you been keeping yourself?"
"Oh, just sticking around. What's up, Georgie?"
"How about a little lunch? Say noon?"
"Be all right with me, I guess. Club?"
"Yeah. Meet you there at 12:30.
"All right. 12:30. So long, Georgie." 4. His morning was not sharply marked into divisions. Interwoven with correspondence and advertisement writing were 1,000 nervous details, calls from clerks who were incessantly and hopefully seeking 5 furnished rooms and a bath at $60 a month, advice to Matt Penniman on getting money out of tenants who had no money, Babbitt's virtues as a real estate broker, as the servant of society in the department of finding houses for families and shops for distributors of food, were steadiness and diligence. He was conventionally honest. He kept his records of buyers and sellers complete. He had experience with leases and titles, and an excellent memory for prices. His shoulders were broad enough, his voice deep enough, his relish of hearty humor strong enough to establish him as one of the ruling caste of good fellows. Yet his eventual importance to mankind was perhaps lessened by his large and complacent ignorance of all architecture save the types of houses turned out by speculative builders, all landscape gardening save the use of curving roads, grass, and 6 ordinary shrubs, and all the commonest axioms of economics. He serenely believed that the one purpose of the real estate business was to make money for George F. Babbitt. True, it was a good advertisement at Boosters' Club lunches and all the varieties of annual banquets to which good fellows were invited. To speak sonorously of unselfish public service, the broker's obligation to keep inviolate the trust of his clients, and a thing called ethics, whose nature was confusing, but if you had it, you were a high-class realtor, and if you didn't, you were a shyster, a piker, and a fly-by-night. These virtues awakened confidence and enabled you to handle bigger propositions, but they didn't imply that you were to be impractical and refuse to take twice the value of a house if a buyer was such an idiot that he didn't jew you down on the asking price. Babbitt spoke well, and often, at these orgies of commercial righteousness about the realtor's function as a seer of the future development of the community and as a prophetic engineer, clearing the pathway for inevitable changes, which meant that a real estate broker could make money by guessing which way the town would grow. This guessing he called vision. In an address to the Boosters' Club he had admitted, "It is at once the duty and privilege of the realtor to know everything about his own city and its environs, where a surgeon is a specialist on every vein and mysterious cell in the human body, and the engineer upon electricity in all its phases, or every bolt of some great bridge majestically arching over a mighty flood. The realtor must know his city inch by inch, and all its faults and virtues." Though he did not know the market price, inch by inch, of certain districts of Zenith, he did not know whether the police force was too large or too small, or whether it was in alliance with gambling and prostitution. He knew the means of fireproofing buildings and the relation of insurance rates to fireproofing, but he did not know how many firemen there were in the city, how they were trained and paid, or how complete their apparatus. He sang eloquently the advantages of proximity of school buildings to rentable homes, but he did not know that it was worth while to know whether the city schoolrooms were properly heated, lighted, ventilated, furnished. He did not know how the teachers were chosen, and though he chanted one of the boasts of Zenith is that we pay our teachers adequately, that was because he had read the statement in the Advocate-Times. Himself, he could not have given the average salary of teachers in Zenith or anywhere else. He had heard it said that conditions in the county jail and the Zenith city prison were not very scientific. He had, with indignation at the criticism of Zenith, skimmed through a report in which the notorious pessimist Seneca Doane, the radical lawyer, asserted that to throw boys and young girls into a bullpen crammed with men suffering from syphilis, delirium torments, and insanity was not the perfect way of educating them. He had controverted the report by growling,
Folks that think a jail ought to be a bloomin' hotel, throttle, make me sick. If people don't like a jail, let 'em behave themselves and keep out of it. Besides, these reform cranks always exaggerate it."
That was the beginning and quite completely the end of his investigation into Zenith Charities and Corrections. And as to the vice districts, he brightly expressed it,
"Those are things that no decent man monkeys with. Besides, matter of fact, I'll tell you confidentially, it's a protection to our daughters and to decent women to have a district where tough nuts can raise Cain. Keeps 'em away from our own homes."
As to industrial conditions, however, Babbitt had thought a great deal, and his opinions may be coordinated as follows.
A good labor union is of value because it keeps out radical unions, which would destroy property. No one ought to be forced to belong to a union, however. All labor agitators who try to force men to join a union should be hanged. In fact, just between ourselves, there oughtn't to be any unions allowed at all. And as it's the best way of fighting the unions, every businessman ought to belong to an employers' association and to the Chamber of Commerce. In union there is strength. So any selfish hog who doesn't join the Chamber of Commerce ought to be forced to.
In nothing, as the expert on whose advice families moved to new neighborhoods to live there for a generation, was Babbitt, more splendidly innocent than in the science of sanitation. He did not know a malaria-bearing mosquito from a bat. He knew nothing about tests of drinking water, and in the matters of plumbing and sewage he was as unlearned as he was voluble. He often referred to the excellence of the bathrooms in the houses he sold. He was fond of explaining why it was that no European ever bathed. Someone had told him, when he was 22, that all cesspools are unhealthy, and he still denounced them. If a client impertinently wanted him to sell a house which had a cesspool, Babbitt always spoke about it before accepting the house and selling it. When he laid out the Glen Oriole acreage development, when he ironed woodland and dipping meadow into a glenless, orioleless, sunburnt, flat, prickly, with small boards displaying the names of imaginary streets, he righteously put in a complete sewage system. It made him feel superior. It enabled him to sneer privately at the Martin Lambsman development, Avonlea, which had a cesspool, and it provided a chorus for the full-page advertisements in which he announced the beauty, convenience, cheapness, and supererogatory healthfulness of Glen Oriole. The only flaw was that Glen Oriole's sewers had insufficient outlet, so the waste remained in them, not very agreeably, while the Avonlea cesspool was a warring septic tank. The whole of the Glen Oriole project was a suggestion that Babbitt, though he really did not hate men recognized as swindlers, was not too unreasonably honest. Operators and buyers prefer that brokers should not be in competition with them as operators and buyers themselves, but attend to their clients' interests only. It was supposed that the Babbitt-Thompson Company were merely agents for Glen Oriole, serving the real owner, Jake Offutt. But the fact was that Babbitt and Thompson owned 62% of the Glen. The president and purchasing agent of the Zenith Street Traction Company owned 28%, and Jake Offutt, a gang politician, a small manufacturer, a tobacco-chewing old factory store who enjoyed dirty politics, business diplomacy, and cheating at poker, had only 10%, which Babbitt and the traction officials had given him for fixing health inspectors and fire inspectors, and a member of the State Transportation Commission. But Babbitt was virtuous. He advocated, though he did not practice, the prohibition of alcohol. He praised, though he did not obey, the laws against motor speeding. He paid his debts. He contributed to the church, the Red Cross, and the Y.M.C.A. He followed the custom of his clan, and cheated only as it was sanctified by precedent, and he never descended into trickery, though, as he explained to Paul Riesling,
"Course, I don't mean to say that I ever had write it literally true, or that I always believe everything I say when I give some buyer a good strong selling spiel. You see, you can see it like this. In the first place, maybe the owner of the property exaggerated when he put it into my hands, and it certainly isn't my place to go proving my principal a liar. And then most folks are so darn crooked themselves that they expect a fellow to do a little lying. So if I was fool enough to never whoop at the ante, I'd get the credit for lying anyway, in self-defense. I got to toot my own horn, like a lawyer defending his client. His burden duty, ain't it, to bring out the poor dub's good points? Why, the judge himself would bawl out a lawyer if he didn't, even if they both knew the guy was guilty. But even so, I don't pad out the truth like Cecil Rountree or Thayer or the rest of those reelers. In fact, I think a fellow that's willing to deliberately up and profit by lying ought to be shot."
Babbitt's value to his clients was rarely better shown than this morning in the conference at 11:30 between himself, Conrad Lighty, and Archibald Purdy. 5. Conrad Lighty was a real estate speculator. He was a nervous speculator. Before he gambled, he consulted bankers, lawyers, architects, contracting builders, and all of their clerks and stenographers who were willing to be cornered and give him advice. He was a bold entrepreneur, and he desired nothing more than complete safety in his investments, freedom from attention to details, and the 30 or 40% profit which, according to all authorities, a pioneer deserves for his risks and foresight. He was a stubby man with a cap-like mass of short gray curls and clothes which, no matter how well cut, seemed shaggy. Below his eyes were semicircular hollows, as though silver dollars had been pressed against them and left an imprint. Particularly and always, Lighty consulted Babbitt, and trusted in his slow cautiousness. 6 months ago Babbitt had learned that one Archibald Purdy, a grocer in the indecisive residential district known as Linden, was talking of opening a butcher shop besides his grocery. Looking up the ownership of adjoining parcels of land, Babbitt found that Purdy owned his present shop, but did not own the one available lot adjoining. He advised Conrad Lighty to purchase this lot for $11,000, though an appraisal on basis of rents did not indicate its value as above $9,000. The rents, declared Babbitt, were too low, and by waiting they could make Purdy come to their price. This was vision. He had to bully Lighty into buying. His first act as agent for Lighty was to increase the rent of the battered store building on the lot. The tenant said a number of rude things, but he paid. Now Purdy seemed ready to buy, and his delay was going to cost him $10,000 extra. The reward paid by the community to Mr. Conrad Lighty for the virtue of employing a broker who had vision, and who understood talking points, strategic values, key situation, under appraisals, and the psychology of salesmanship. Lighty came to the conference exultantly. He was fond of Babbitt this morning and called him Old Hoss. Purdy the grocer, a long-nosed man and solemn, seemed to care less for Babbitt and for vision, but Babbitt met him at the street door of the office and guided him toward the private room with the affectionate little cries of, "This way, Brother Purdy." He took from the correspondence file the entire box of cigars and forced them on his guests. He pushed their chairs 2 inches forward and 3 inches back, which gave a hospitable note, then leaned back on his desk chair and looked plump and jolly. But he spoke to the weakling grocer with firmness. "Well, Brother Purdy, we've been having some pretty tempting offers from butchers and a slew of other folks for that lot next to your store. But I persuaded Brother Lighty that we ought to give you a shot at the property first. I said to Lighty, it'd be a rotten shame. I said, if somebody went and opened a combination grocery and meat market right next door and ruined Purdy's nice little business, especially," Babbitt leaned forward and his voice was harsh, "it would be hard luck if one of those cash and carry chain stores got in there and started cutting prices below cost till they got rid of competition, force you to the wall." Purdy snatched his thin hands from his pockets, pulled up his trousers, thrust his hands back into his pockets, tilted in the heavy oak chair, and tried to look amused as he struggled.
Yes, or bad competition, but I guess you don't realize the pulling power that personality has in a neighborhood business."
The great Babbitt smiled.
"That's so. Just as you feel, old man. We thought we'd give you first chance. All right, then."
"Now look here," Purdy wailed.
"I know for a fact that a piece of property about same size right near sold for less than $8,500 2 years ago, and here you fellows are asking me $24,000. Why, I'd have a mortgage. I wouldn't mind so much paying $12,000, but why, good God, Mr. Babbitt, you're asking more than twice its value, and threaten to ruin me if I don't take it."
Purdy, I don't like your way of talking. I don't like it one little bit. Supposing Lyte and I were stinking enough to want to ruin any fellow human,
Don't you suppose we know it's to our own selfish interest to have everybody in Zenith prosperous? But all this is beside the point. Tell you what we'll do. We'll come down to 23,500 down, and the rest on mortgage. And if you want to wreck the old shack and rebuild, I guess I can get Lyte here to loosen up for a building mortgage on good liberal terms. Heavens, man, we'd be glad to oblige you. We don't like those foreign grocery trusts any better than you do. But it isn't reasonable to expect us to sacrifice 11,000 or more just for neighbors, is it? How about it, Lyte? You willing to come down?"
By warmly taking Purdy's part, Babbitt persuaded the benevolent Mr. Lyte to reduce his price to $21,000. At the right moment, Babbitt snatched from a drawer the agreement he had Miss McGowan type out a week ago and thrust it into Purdy's hands. He genially shook his fountain pen to make certain that it was flowing, handed it to Purdy, and approvingly watched him sign. The work of the world was being done. Lyte had made something over $9,000. Babbitt had made a $450 commission. Purdy had, by the sensitive mechanism of modern finance, been provided with a business building, and soon the happy inhabitants of Linden would have meat lavished upon them at prices only a little higher than those downtown. It had been a manly battle, but after it Babbitt drooped. This was the only really amusing contest he had been planning. There was nothing ahead save details of leases, appraisals, and mortgages. He muttered,
makes me sick to think of Lyte carrying off most of the profit when I did all the work. The old skinflint. And what else have I got to do today? Like to take a good long vacation, motor trip or something."
He sprang up, rekindled by the thought of lunching with Paul Riesling. End of chapter 4.